This video is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's up, guys? Michael here with a quick and dirty take on the latest from the Parker Stone Brain Trust. The new South Park special, The Streaming Wars, left us equally delighted and disturbed. Delighted because this is some top-notch South Park content.
I'm gonna go hang out at Tolkien's house for a bit, Karen.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am, Karen.
You better knock that off. I don't want you playing with Tolkien.
Karen, just come back inside.
And disturbed because of shit like this. But beyond that, this episode was just plain clever, using unexpected metaphors to critique two very annoying things. One, the proliferation of streaming platforms and the avalanche of mediocre content it has wrought. We may or may not have talked about this recently. And two, climate change, the history of water commodification and consumption, and more specifically, the current droughts in California and Colorado. But is there something deeper going on here? Are the platform wars and the water wars ideologically linked, either on or off screen? And most crucially, are we all floating our own crappy little popsicle stick boats when we engage with global capitalism? Let's find out in this Wisecrack QuickTake. Will we all be drinking pee-pee soon? But before we dive in, we want to thank this video sponsor, BetterHelp. If you're feeling depressed, anxious, or overwhelmed these days, BetterHelp can be an excellent resource for feeling better. And I know from personal experience, when you're feeling those types of things, therapy can be a godsend. Now, BetterHelp's network of more than 20,000 therapists are ready to listen to and help you. After taking a brief questionnaire, you'll be matched with a therapist whose expertise fits your unique needs. And what's so cool about a platform like BetterHelp, where everything is done remotely, is that you can work with a therapist whose skills might not otherwise be available in your area. Within 48 hours, you can start messaging with your therapist at any time. And when you do, you'll receive timely and thoughtful responses in return. Additionally, you can schedule your choice of secure phone or video sessions to receive counseling in real time. Again, like I've said before, I myself have been to therapy. I have found it beyond useful, and I just can't urge you to consider it enough if you're dealing with things like depression and anxiety. Now, if you and your therapist aren't a perfect match, it's easy and free to switch to a new one. So join the more than 2 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/wisecrack, or just click the link in the video description. When you do, you'll get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/wisecrack. And now, back to the show. Let's start with what South Park is critiquing. It revolves around a bitter war over streaming amongst various South Park landowners. A couple of small streamers start out, find increased competition, and eventually are basically wiped out by the largest streamer of all.
I intend to be the Amazon River.
This obviously mirrors the absolute explosion of streaming platforms we've seen since Netflix moved beyond DVDs in 2007. Hulu got big the following year, but Netflix set a new playbook when it started releasing original content in 2013. Competitors like Disney Plus would later emerge, proliferating in the form of Amazon Prime, Peacock, Paramount Plus, incidentally South Park's new streaming home, and so on. The growth of streamers led to an increasingly ruthless fight to see who could own our attention. And Netflix's recent fall from stock market grace marks an important turning point in the streaming wars. As Chris Morangi of Gamco Investors explains, Act 1 was the land grab phase. Now we're in the middle act. We see that first act land grab well underway in this special. It's personified by golf magnate Mr. Cussler, who scrambles to acquire lots of land so he can catch up on the streaming wars, not unlike what Amazon Prime did. At the same time, the streaming wars in real life and in South Park have wrought a fierce competition to land top-tier talent to produce ever more content. And those proverbial boat builders are left in the middle, just trying to deliver a good product.
We're just in the middle doing our thing.
Sidebar, this feels pretty meta, with Matt and Trey identifying with the boys as independent creators in their own crowded and highly demanding field of content. So clearly, the metaphor works. But there's also something really interesting about the episode's more literal central conflict. The idea of water wars in the American West, especially California, isn't just a TV fantasy. You know the show is invoking the century-old California water wars from the way the water inspector character evokes the famous noir Chinatown. If that was too subtle for you, there's also some shot-for-shot recreations from the film. After all, water has always been a hot and rare natural commodity in both California and South Park's home state. For example, back in 1904, Los Angeles had the fastest growing population of any American city, and not nearly enough water to support its anticipated growth. So engineer and water supervisor William Mulholland and wealthy former mayor Fred Eaton hatched a plan to buy land 200 miles north on the Owens River in a region with plentiful water flow. So So as not to let the current residents know what he was really up to, Eden lied and claimed he just wanted to start a cattle ranch and was able to acquire much of the land along the river, not unlike one golf magnate.
Oh, yes. It looks absolutely ideal.
When residents were reluctant to sell, Eden lied again, hinting that the government might seize their property if they didn't comply. Meanwhile, the Owens River area government was busy planning their own irrigation project that would serve hundreds of thousands of acres of local farmland. But Eden eventually bought so much river-adjacent land that this plan became impossible. He sold the land to LA County, who built an aqueduct that eventually brought thousands of gallons of water to the city each year. LA would continue to buy more property by the Owens River, which saw its once plentiful land run arid, its community collapse, its farmers ruined, its schools closed, and so on. A few locals fought back by bombing the aqueduct and various other acts of protest, but were simply no force for the city of LA, the city that birthed both Billie Eilish and Buffalo Chicken Pizza. We see a similarly nefarious game afoot in South Park, where Mr. Cussler snatches up all the river-adjacent land in hopes of banking a considerable profit by selling it to drought-afflicted city dwellers. Meanwhile, back in real life, the California water wars continue as the wealthy wield their power to monopolize water flows. The Resnicks, a powerful billionaire couple who own huge produce companies in California, currently use more water than every home in Los Angeles combined. I hope they're at least well hydrated. Much of that water is provided directly by the country or state via decades-old contracts, and the other 9% is purchased on the water market. That's a significant enough amount to drive prices up, making it harder for smaller farmers to compete. What's more, the couple reportedly secured land prime for water storage via secret meetings with water officials in the 90s, and they're allowed to store their water and sell it back to the city in times of drought. This is exactly what we see happening in this special, where folks fortunate enough to own valuable land, and lots of it, are able to profit off a surrounding drought that's making everyone else miserable. The only material difference between real life and this special, then, is that Mr. Cussler dies before he gets to become a whole lot richer. In contrast, the real-life Resnicks are making bank off their sweet setup. According to research by the Contra Costa Times from 2000 to 2007, the Resnicks purchased tons of water for prices as low as $28 per acre foot, then sold it to California for up to $196. These shenanigans earned them over $30 million, all while the rest of the city suffered in a drought. Now that we've set the stage for the new South Park special's focus on the proliferation of platforms and the ongoing water wars, it's worth asking, why do these make for such an apt metaphor? We think we know why, and the answer leaves us increasingly convinced that contemporary capitalism has gotten to be too capitalism-y, even for our libertarian pals Matt and Trey. We'll explain. By its very nature, capitalism demands a limitless economic growth. Indeed, one study found that a steady-state zero-growth economy is simply not feasible within the social relations of capitalism. As economist William Strauss writes of Life Under Capitalism, economic growth is the bottom line. We expect sustained and continuous growth. If an economy is not growing, there's something wrong with it. Incidentally, every time someone reads that quote out loud, a little Ronald Reagan gets its horns. And according to scholar Wendy Lynn Lee in her book Eco-Nihilism, profit is not only its object, but its existential condition. Commodities form the oxygenating corpuscles of its bloodstream, money the bone marrow of its ligature. Hence, the object of every business plan is not merely growth, but to grow the body of capital forever or die. Say what you will about Wendy Lynn Lee, but she has bars. We see this mentality at play in this special when Stan and Tolkien are asked to produce 10,000 boats for the ruthlessly ambitious Cussler.
I want 10,000 of your little boats, and I'll pay you $15,000.
They set to work and somehow managed to reach their goal, but they gotta know, popsicle boats can't scale forever. That's because the mentality of growth runs up against a very simple reality. We live on a finite planet. As Lee explains, this then is capital's irresolvable contradiction. It must grow beyond what the planet can sustain, and it cannot do so. That the planet is a fountain of endless resources is a myth. No future worth wanting can sustain or even reform its inherently rapacious conquest for marketable commodities. While the productive capacity of our planet is limited, the consumptive desires of the Homo sapiens on it are not. After World War II, America sustained its wartime levels of production, which created a problem. Businesses needed to generate enough consumption for everything that was being made. Advertising ballooned. using tools gleaned from psychoanalysis to foment endless desire for consumer goods or fancy astroturf lawns to surround your ranch-style house. The consumption spurred on by this process has since become responsible for over 70% of America's GDP. The book Affluenza invites us to contrast that with, say, resource-scarce 18th century Japan, during which a culture of contraction emphasized quality over quantity and human knowledge over material things. Don't waste resources. Be grateful and respectful was the roughly translated motto. The idea of production for production's sake is all over South Park's critique of the streaming wars. The boys lament that they're just making stuff to make stuff, and witness the quality of their product diminishing the more they're forced to scale and cut corners. Not unlike the way Netflix has dropped hundreds of films in recent years, most of which are frankly not the most good.
In here, the party never stops.
Eventually, a sugar high Butters wonders frantically if it even matters what quality of stuff they produce at all.
And they don't give a how good anything is. And the people who made all the deals, well, they don't give a because they're all gonna get fired anyway. You know?
Just like production for production's sake, the idea of consumption for consumption's sake, and a complete disregard for how we use resources, is all over South Park in recent specials. The second the water turns back on, we see a wasteful parade of lawn watering, car washing, and sprinkler prancing, with valid reason.
What about our homeowners association rules?
This isn't much of a caricature. In an average lifetime, each American consumes 40 million gallons of water for personal, industrial, and agricultural purposes. Researchers Mathis Wackernagel and William Reese determined that if all people lived like the average American, we'd need 5 more planets. Meanwhile, the demand for even more boats is akin to our demand for ever more streaming content to consume. And one of the grand promises of capitalism is just that: endless variety, endless consumer choice, endless ways to consume. But as our friend PP quickly learns, endless consumer choices may be more dizzying and annoying than anything else. Infinite options, like infinite streaming platforms to pay $10 a month for, might not be that desirable after all.
There's too many streaming services. There's a streaming service for this and a streaming service for that. PP can't define his stuff.
So where are we left in our world of overproduction and overconsumption? According to Lee, nowhere good. She writes that conquest capital devours and digests values, ethical, civic, and aesthetic, reducing each to that single value without which it can neither replicate itself nor grow. Exchange. In so doing, it generates a state of affairs that can only rightfully be described as pathologically nihilistic. Again, she has bars. According to philosopher Alain Badiou, nihilism is, fittingly, that murderous avatar of desire for the West. Meaning that when capitalism erodes all values and aren't connected with profit and consumption, we end up in a culture of nihilism, where nothing means anything except the bottom line. That's certainly what Stan's thinking when he quickly agrees to Cussler's deal, despite probably knowing that it's not in the best economic interest of his family. When we have no tangible values beyond the logic of capital, we're left in pretty grim straits. At the same time, we know we're using up our planet's finite resources, yet we can't stop pursuing constant growth. In this way, according to Lee, capitalism destroys its own existential conditions through the wholesale commodification of the finite ecosystems upon which it depends, i.e., capitalism sets the ladder it's using to get to heaven on fire. In the scramble for South Park's water, these landowners aren't fixing any long-term problems caused by
global man-bear pig.
They're merely capitalizing off of a resource shortage that's been caused by big industry in the first place. They don't see this crisis as a crisis, but as an opportunity. If we wanted to depress you, we'd mention that this is happening in real life. Scholar Mackenzie Funk documents the rise of private business finding ways to profit from our dramatically changing planet in his book, Windfall: The Booming Business of Global Warming. That's right, corporations have destroyed the Earth, and now they're gonna make bank off of it. See also our video on carbon capture, in which a Stanford scientist explains how companies are making profits off our climate disaster. Take water, which is going to become an increasingly valuable commodity. Conservative economists are already proposing the creation of a more robust water market that relies on, well, pure market rules rather than continuing to have the state or federal governments subsidize it. This is enticing to investors. As Citigroup's chief economist says, water as an asset class will, in my view, become eventually the single most important physical commodity-based asset class, dwarfing oil among other valuable commodities. The very wealthy are already investing in it, and water-based hedge funds like Summit Global Management are pouring billions of dollars into it, as they also buy up billions of gallons of river water and other privatized water utilities as they plan for a future where we're all really fucking thirsty. As historian Mark Reisner puts it, water flows uphill to money. This approach, profiting off of an ecological crisis, is exemplified in the presumably pasta-loving character of Pee-Pee. The amusement park owner knows very well that Man Bear Pig will get him one day, but gleefully points out,
Man Bear Pig, eventually, he gonna kill everybody. He just gonna kill you first.
in the nihilism of unchecked capitalism, there's no truth beyond your bottom line, and there's nothing else to do but accumulate more wealth.
And when all the water is gone, there's only one thing left for people to use. The one thing that a pee-pee have more than everybody, huh?
And wait for the day Man Bear Pig sends you out for one final ride down the water slide. Unless, of course, you're Eric Cartman. Don't worry, we didn't forget about him. Cartman's tireless desire for something cool to happen also makes him something like the id of capitalism. In his longing to upgrade his life by moving into Cussler's mansion, he tries to convince his mom to get just stupidly big breast implants. This is not unlike the way so many advertisements target women's bodily insecurities, convincing them they're just one Brazilian butt lift away from the life they dream of. And if Cartman is pure unbridled capitalism, Cartman's mom functions as a kind of avatar for the American consumer who's determined not to get swindled or outsmarted again. And as a sign, perhaps, that there might be hope for South Park, and for all of us, she gets the best of Cartman this time, at least for now. And Cartman, for his part, ends up with massive boobs, because you gotta commit to the bid. But what do you guys think? Are Matt and Trey becoming increasingly skeptical of capitalism the richer they get? Are we capable of thinking about anything outside of a framework of profit and the accumulation of wealth? Or is everything just royally f***ed? Let us know in the comments. Huge thanks to our patrons for all your support, and check out our revamped Patreon page today. And be sure to check out our new stream, Wisecrack Live, right here every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific. Maul that subscribe button like you're a Man Bear Pig disemboweling a water supervisor, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.